you and welcome back for our last two sessions of the day. It's been a long day. It's been an exciting day, but I think these last two talks should keep the momentum going. And this one is called Ladies Who Punch, which is quite a title. I don't think there is going to be any fighting, I should warn you now. But this is a talk about 50 courageous trailblazers, famous and lesser known, who have changed history and remoulded cultures, creating a new world order. And this is a book by Yasmin Alibhai Brown, who needs, once again, very little by way of introduction. I'm sure everybody in the room is familiar with Yasmin, who is always... I always think of you as coming to our East Africa events here at SOAS, being someone who came from Uganda in 1972. And she's a journalist, a broadcaster and an author, has written for just about every paper, won just about every award going, so many distinctions. And as well as writing, and she's known for her role as a speaker, and speaks on diversity and inclusion and is trustee of many arts organisations and the author of many books, including a fascinating one on food and cooking that's very well known. And she's talking with Baroness Tessa Blackstone, who was formerly head of our close neighbour here, Birkbeck College, Vice-Chancellor of the University of Greenwich, chairperson of so many things I can't list them, but they include the Royal Opera House, the Fabian Society and the British Library. So two ladies who definitely punch above their weight are going to present this penultimate session of the day. So welcome. I can leave it in your hands, questions and answers and so on afterwards. And Aisha Minocha will be taking over from me after this.
Thank you very much indeed, Rosemary. You've been introduced already, Yasmin. I certainly think you're a lady who punches. Yasmin's going to talk for a little while about her book. I'm sorry. Okay, sorry, terrible failure of the chair. I just wanted to say that Yasmin is certainly a lady who punches. She's going to talk about her book for a little while. I will ask 2 or 3 questions, and then I'm going to pass it over to the audience. So please put your hands up when we get to that point and contribute in any way you want by asking Yasmin questions, but also by commenting, if you want to, on some of these amazing women that she has in this book. So thank you all very much, and over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you all for coming on a sunny day. Thank you, Tessa. We haven't seen each other for so long, so I'm really glad we caught up again. So I'll just briefly say why the book and what the book is, and then you're going to ask me some questions. But it's quite true. I am a lady who punches. And this comes from, of course, this rather rude way a lot of middle-class women are described by the media. Oh, they're ladies who lunch. And I thought that would make a good title, Ladies Who Punch. And actually, they haven't got copies of the book, for which I do not forgive them. But the cover is brilliant. It's got 3 fists, a brown, a white, and a black. And we're all ladies who punch. One of my most recent punchy moments, and I'm so proud of this, I have to share it with you, was when I was on Question Time in March, after a long absence, and somebody asked the question about Stanley Johnson apparently was going to be given a knighthood by his son. And somebody in the audience said, can my dad have a knighthood too? And Ken Clark, who's actually not a bad chap, started telling us how lovely Stanley was and what a good European he is. And so when it came to me, I said, but he's a wife-beater. Which he is. It's in the public space. And apparently this has stopped him getting a knighthood. This is what happens when you punch. I'm so proud if true. So the reason I wrote the book, the publishers actually asked me to do one. It was my lockdown book. And in a way, it's a shame it came out during that period, so we couldn't have a launch or anything. But I was very pleased to do it. Because when I come from Uganda, when I came here in 1972, I was 23 and I was doing, I had a scholarship to do my postgrad degree at Oxford. And that's where I heard the word feminism. My mother was a feminist before the word was spoken. She had to be, because I had a useless father and she had to do 3 jobs and raise 3 children. But never the word feminism wasn't there. But of course, Oxford in the 70s was all full of feminism. I think it was phase 1 or 2, I think. And it was very exercised about sexual rights and not having children because that was bad for feminism. It was quite a hot and confusing time. And I joined a group and pretended that I could be that kind of feminist. But all the while, we were talking about things that I thought were really unimportant, because back from where I came, what women were suffering wasn't even on their horizons. But I still thought, I've got to be this kind of feminism. So there was a day in 74, this is absolutely true, where I even burnt a bra. There was a ceremony to burn bras, and I burnt a bra. But actually very soon after that, I realized that feminism was so narrow, that feminism. It was so disconnected from women of the world. It was so centered on particular privileges of being Western women. And from then to the book was a long journey. I wanted to write a book which celebrated all women. There are very few books on feminism. There are 2, I think, that I really admire, that celebrate women of all backgrounds, ethnic, class, geographic, and so on. I thought it was really important to have a book that anybody could read, where the stories were about a whole range of women, some who are historical, some who are part of the feminism I eventually felt very comfortable with, and younger women who I think are just absolutely brilliant feminists. So choosing who to include was really, really hard. I think there can be 100 books with 50 women, and we wouldn't cover them all. So the choices were important, but the one thing I wanted to write about or include were women who did not know their place. We're always being told, know your place. I'm attacked horribly on Twitter, absolutely horribly, because I do not know my place. Because as an immigrant, I should know my place. As a woman, I should know my place. So I included all those women who said, go away, I define who I am. You don't tell me what my place is. And really, it begins a long time ago. It begins with women in the 18th century. And the book that really influenced me was the Bible, really, of feminism. When I was in school, I had a teacher who said, I think you should have this book. And she gave me Mary Wollstonecraft's Bible on feminism. And to this day, her words are so, so important. She lived in a century when women had no rights at all. And yet she was able to see not only the injustices, but why her book is called A Vindication on the Rights of Women. Why she was so special, as she also wrote that men, by infantilizing women, men also lose their strengths. Okay, by not having someone to share your life with, economically, socially, and in the family. You're depriving men as much as you are oppressing women. This was a woman who lived between 1759 and 1797. And if you can, please get the book and read it. It has more to say to us than, say, Margaret Thatcher ever did, because she understands. I'm trying to find one of the quotes, but I can't. And it was that idea, let's have women who don't have any idea of what society would reject, what their family, what their men, what society, their community, their nation wants them to be. And I have included Margaret Thatcher because, of course, she did defy those who thought women could never be prime minister. I detested her, but you can't deny her that legacy. So I've included women who made an extraordinary statement about themselves and got to somewhere at a time when it was absolutely, utterly impossible. So I've included women, the first doctor. As I was walking from the tube station, I noticed a blue plaque saying the first dentist, all in the Victorian age. I've included the first lawyer, the first woman who was ever allowed to study law in this country, who was in fact an Indian, whose story has been forgotten. It was then somebody, this is Cornelia Sorabji, an extraordinary Parsi woman, and every woman used different tricks, if you like. She used her femininity to knock down the barriers in Oxford. The Queen Victoria loved her because she wore such gorgeous saris, but all the time she knew where she was headed, and she did get her qualifications. The men wouldn't let her attend classes. The men wouldn't let her do the exams for a long time. She fought and fought and fought, and I think 20 years after qualifying, she finally was able to, accepted by the bar. So there are other women, the first gay woman who lived openly with her wife up in the north, a landowner. At that time, when people had and she got married to her wife secretly in a church. So there are all kinds of women. And in the present day, a kind of elder stateswomen, if you like, again, there are names of women who previously have just been excluded in the feminist narrative. And I really wanted to include them. Some we know, some we need to know. And it's not just about fairness. It's about saying to younger women and our daughters, never accept your place. Fight me. I say this to my daughter. Fight me if I try and tell you that you should do this, that, or the other. Try practicing on me, then you will be able to practice on others. It's really hard. It makes me mad. But I think that's where it begins, this be who you want to be. The younger women are my inspiration. People like Caroline Credo Perez, a young woman who produced such extraordinary research, but only 4 years ago. She showed the world that science and technology totally discriminates against women and medicine at a very basic level. So when they test medicines for heart disease, they test them on men. And the prescription that women get have only been tested on men. When you wear a seatbelt, seatbelts have only been tested on men. So actually women are really in danger when they use seatbelts because they've not been... This is an absolutely brilliant book. So she's in that book. Anita Anand, who's again a woman of Indian heritage, who is one of our top broadcasters on the BBC now. But she began with ZTV. And what she did, and it's a wonderful story, nobody knew what ZTV was back then. It was a garage. And she just rang the three leaders at one election. She rang the three leaders of parties who were standing, saying, literally, it was a garage. Do you want me to interview you before the election? Because, you know, the Asian vote really counts. My name is Anita Anand. Can you appear on my show? They all did. And that's how she started, because she had the guts, she has the confidence, to say, yeah, so what if I'm Asian? I can do this. I can do what you're doing on BBC Newsnight. And my God, she's just gone up like that. So it's not just a celebration. That's what I want to emphasize. There's not much to celebrate because women's lives are still horribly endangered the world over. 3 women a week are murdered here by men who know, most of them who know them. Imagine that in an advanced country, 3 women a week. If 3 dogs a week were being murdered by their owners, imagine the reaction of this country. So I'm not saying we should be celebrating, but I'm saying that no woman should ever, ever know her place, and she should learn to punch.
Thank you very much indeed, Yasmin. That's a really excellent... That is a really excellent introduction to a series of issues. I want to begin by asking you a little bit about India as a country where there are big issues for women. I remember being in India maybe 10 or 15 years ago, and the British High Commissioner said to me, India is not a good place to be a woman. There's a mixed audience here this afternoon, quite a lot of Indians, quite a lot of Indian women. And I know that you know quite a lot about it, but I would love to hear from the audience in a moment a bit about their views about what needs to be done in India to emancipate women, to improve the position of women, whether rich or poor. I think it's a big subject for India, as it is for most countries, but I would say it's more of an issue in terms of not being able to celebrate too much than perhaps even in the UK. So that, I think, is the first area that we might talk about. The second thing I want to ask you is whether you don't think, even though it's unfinished business and there are many ways in which women are not treated in the way that they should be, do not have the opportunities they should have. There have, I would say, in my lifetime, been quite revolutionary changes and a huge improvement in opportunities for women. If I think about when I went to university in the early 1960s, only about a quarter of British students were women. Today, there are more women, 60% women, 40% men in British universities. That's a very, very big change. If you look at the professions, and you talked a bit about the first woman lawyer and the fight that she had to be accepted, to get the training she needed and eventually to be admitted to the bar, it took her 20 years. I know a certain amount about Elizabeth Garrett Anderson, who's in your book, who was the first woman doctor. She also had an enormous fight to become accepted. The medical schools refused to let her register as a student. The profession wouldn't accept that once she had got training through the Society of Apothecaries and then an MD in Paris, that she could practice as a doctor. I mean, these were huge hurdles. Again, if you look today, there are more women being trained in medicine than there are men. If you look at accountancy, there are now more women accountants, graduate accountants being trained, and the same is true for lawyers. More women solicitors in particular. At the bar, the ratio is not quite as good as it is in the other half of the profession. So these are dramatic and revolutionary changes. What we still haven't yet seen is the progression of these women right to the top. So we still don't have enough people in universities, women who become professors. Although I think this is changing, and I think eventually, as these younger women come through, we will see women taking their rightful place in leadership roles in British universities. And the same applies to politics, to industry, to commerce, where they are breaking through at the earlier stages, but not necessarily yet becoming true definers and leaders of the worlds in which they inhabit. I mean, just take politics. The Labour Party now has more women MPs in the House of Commons than male MPs. Nobody would have believed that would be possible 25 years ago. So I do think we have quite a lot to celebrate. And I do feel we need to be optimistic about what is happening. But I don't, for one moment, doubt what you're saying, which is that there are still huge problems that we have to face. I want to come back briefly to your list of people. And I do want to challenge you on one thing, and that's actually having Margaret Thatcher on this list. Although you're right, she was a woman who was not prepared to know her place in a traditional sense. She was in no sense a feminist. She didn't really care about women and their future. She didn't appoint a single woman to her cabinet till very belatedly. She had a woman who was the leader of the House of Lords, but nobody from the House of Commons in her cabinet. That's pretty shocking, given the period in which she was Prime Minister through the 1980s into the 1990s. And she didn't really get it. She was somebody who had made her way remarkably in many senses, and she really didn't see why any other woman couldn't be like her. She didn't have that kind of emotional intelligence to understand this. And while talking about the first woman Prime Minister in the UK, I'd like to ask what you think about Indira Gandhi, who isn't on your list. But
she's not British. They're all British women.
Oh, they're all British. They're all British. But okay.
But I'd like to answer that question on Margaret Thatcher. No, many of the women in the book weren't feminists. I mean, that's a different category. Yeah. And Barbara Castle, whom I deeply admire, actually made a speech saying, she didn't believe in feminism, and that wasn't my criteria. Like I said, I detested Margaret Thatcher and continue to detest her. But Hillary Clinton decided not to have her in her book, which she and her daughter wrote. And I thought that was wrong, because Margaret Thatcher was not just the first Prime Minister in Britain, but in Europe. And you have to give a woman credit for that, even as you despise her. Because it seems to me, that you cannot deny that history. So I completely agree. She was utterly contemptuous, actually, of feminism and that kind of thing. But the question on India is a really important one. Because I think, again, like almost all societies, there's a huge sea change. And you're right, what we see in this country today, an enormous, enormous change in the position of girls and women. And the same things happened in India. There are women who are reaching for the skies in India and doing astonishingly wonderful work in the creative sector, in industry, everywhere. However, the safety of females and women continues to be, I think, a very serious issue. And I remember chairing a debate at a journalist club here in London after the Delhi rapes, and a program was made by the BBC on what happened. And I was chairing it, and on the program, one or two judges, I don't know if you've seen this program, actually said, there were, not judges, sorry, lawyers, said she had no business being outside at that time with a male friend. That is not what we expect or accept in our society. And excuse me, she lived in Delhi, the capital of India. She can't go to the movies at 8 o'clock at night with a friend, and a lawyer saying that openly and certainly it's a very complicated picture. India is zooming ahead of most nations when it comes to the economy, creative, movies, fashion. There's no stopping them. But at the same time, the undervaluing of the female goes on. And it's a challenge. And because I chaired this session, I had a lot of trouble from the Indian embassy here. A lot of trouble.
Well, we won't ask you to tell us about what that trouble was, but perhaps we can come back to that later. But I'd like to open it up now to the audience. And if you'd like to put up your hand, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, and perhaps say who you are.
She won't, but I will. What was the trouble with the Indian embassy?
Sorry?
What was the trouble with the Indian embassy?
He said, I was trying to get a visa to go to India to make a radio program, and they denied me the visa for many weeks. And eventually I had to go for a meeting, and one of them said, "You gave my country a bad name." I said, "I didn't give your country a bad name. Those rapists gave your country a bad name." And it was a very uncomfortable conversation about whether I would get visas again. I haven't tried since, but I will.
Well, as a lady who punches, never give up.
Never give up.
The question here. Yes.
Thank you. This question of the position of women in Indian society has always puzzled me, because, like Yasmin, I'm from East Africa, but I've lived in India for a while, and then I've come here about the same time in '73. And now I've got two daughters who are, pulling punches above their weight, and I've got one daughter who's truly fighting for her corner with poetry, etc. But when you look at the original concept or the respect that women get in the Indian society, we have goddesses who literally have punched above their weight, or literally punched in mythology. Durga, for example, in her many forms. And women are actually revered. They're given respect in history, maybe in mythology. But there is some sort of paradox here, because although they're given respect in whatever, maybe it's fictitious, maybe it's not, but you also see that respect at various stages, as mothers, as sisters. We have Raksha Bandhan and so on, where the brother actually promises to protect the sister. But so this position that women are in now in India seems to be a product of more, I don't know whether it's outside influences or it's modern living or the media. And I think the media has played some sort of role in that. And I hope the media can also do the reverse and change the position, because I think as more and more women come onto the scene, hopefully they'll change it and make sure that the media works in their favor.
Thank you. I want to very quickly say a couple of things. It's not just India. The most advanced countries in the world.
Absolutely.
On the one hand, there's immense progress, and there's a lot of kind of the Madonna thing, that certainly the matriarch. But on the other hand, there is this constant undermining of girls and women. Girls in the West today, young girls, are being subjected to the most horrendous sexual violence by young men who are addicted, for example, to pornography. So all countries have this kind of dichotomy. But in the case of India, it is like you, I've always been struck by that you have these goddesses and yet it's not modern. From ancient times, the birth of a girl caused tears, and the birth of a boy brought joy. And somewhere this thing, and it's not only India, it's the same in Pakistan, it's in Arab countries, so on. And I also want to emphasize, and I have said this in the book, that it's not anti-men, this book, because many of the women I interviewed said, I am what I, and actually Elizabeth Garrett herself, I am what I am because of my father. And actually Margaret Thatcher said that too. She credited her father. But, or my, my partner. So there are men who are there the world over who are with us on this journey. But unfortunately, in fact, the more equality we get, the more punishment we face. And while I'm on the subject, women are not saints. If I can I can't share with you in polite language what I think of Suella Braverman. I feel what I feel about her cannot be printed. Okay, so we have to watch out not to kind of assume that women are good for the world. There are now more female editors than we've ever had on newspapers. Some of those editors publish stuff on women and girls that make me sick. As you said, it's the media selling papers.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you.
Question over
Perhaps
here.
you could,
Yes, no,
perhaps you could add
next.
Preeti Patel to your list of...
Same.
Thank you.
Ditto.
I was going to make a comment on what you just said about women who punch. There are lots of women who punch from the Asian community who came here. I was born here, 1947. My mother came as one of two women on a troop ship in 1945 or thereabouts. And if you're looking for a feminist or a female forward-looking person, that would be somebody like my mother, Kailash Puri, who came from a very traditional Punjabi Sikh family, and I think you know her.
I knew her and I really loved her, actually. She was great.
So she became what was called an agony aunt in this country. And she was here at the time when a lot of Asians came. And the point I'm going to make is that there's this dichotomy. Asian families, Punjabi families coming from East Africa or India or Punjab, from a very traditional background, arriving here in the 1960s, mid-1960s, when, sex and love and rock and roll was open. So these traditional Asian women came to this society, literally stepped off the plane from being in a very protected or parda environment into an environment where they had to face this completely new situation.
Good point. Yeah.
I think that was a great moment when we need to try and understand, where you pick up people from one society and one culture and you dump them into something completely different as to how women react. And I think my mother wrote her autobiography on this. It's called The Pool of Life, in which she enumerates the experience of lots and lots of young women at the time grappling with the difficulty of being a sister-in-law, a mother, a daughter-in-law, and so on in the home, and a woman like her friends on the street. I wonder if you'd like to comment on that transition.
No, she was great, and you're so right. And I came in 72, and I've always been very free-thinking, but I remember coming to Britain for the first time and being shocked by the culture I saw, because in the colonies they told us the British were really upright, they obeyed rules, they had very good manners, and I would see couples in Hyde Park and have to hide my eyes, and it was astonishing to me that how misrepresented that culture was. But what your mother did, which no one has done since, was she found the language, the words for sex. Many of our languages have no words for sex. Sexual pleasure, what you do. Often these girls are married, they've not been told anything. And your mother was astonishing. She would actually write in Punjabi advice on sex. I mean, she was a complete revolutionary. I hope one day we must find a way of remembering her. So we'll do that, because she was truly amazing.
Question over here. Can you say who you are, everybody who's asking questions, just so we can put you in contact?
Hi, my name is Harbir Singh. Certainly the lecture has been very interesting about women advancing, and like the Me Too campaign, which women did quite a lot. But basically I want to come down to the question of what you say, the hand that rocks the cradle rules the world. So what's happened to the ladies now? You're rocking the cradle, but you should try and teach the children being brought up to be better persons, because everything starts from the mother. Yeah. So unless you tell the mother to share the duties at home or other things like that, progress won't be made. We can just talk like this all the time.
But no, it's not the duty of the mother. It's the duty of the mother and the father.
And the father.
And the father.
Okay.
That's the thing.
Yeah, but
together we'll do it.
The mother has to start it off.
No. When a baby is born, the baby belongs to the two of us, and then the family. And for too long, the dads have kind of said, yes, romanticized motherhood. And motherhood is very important. But actually it has to be parenthood. A child raised by two involved parents. That's a culture change that needs to happen.
Yeah. Actually, he does. He brought the girls up.
A question down here in the front. Or comment.
I think we're forgetting...
Who are you?
I'm Imam Murthy. I'm a student at Birkbeck.
Very nice always to meet Birkbeck students.
So I think we're forgetting that historically women were valued in India. There was talk of sex, there was talk of love, there was talk of all that. There were some cultures, some parts of India, like the Malabar coast, my own Jaffna, which were matriarchal cultures. So we are forgetting that these things did exist. And when I was a student in school in Ceylon, we learnt all the sort of really old Tamil poetry. But it was not glossed properly. You didn't, they sort of hid the bits about the sex and stuff which was in there. So I think we are mistaken when we say that these things are modern media, because they were there. It was a different morality that was imposed, maybe. And it was a Victorian morality, actually. And so we can't say it didn't exist. It's just that we need to maybe recover our
If
culture.
it existed, yes, but I think deep-rooted in through all the major religions, for example, all the major world religions, there are appalling prejudices about women, menstruation, which women can go into what temple when. It begins with that, or the Christian word, the original sin. I mean, God, they started blaming us from Eve onwards. What chance did we have? We have to bloody fight even now in 2023. The idea of the sinful woman is deep in all cultures. And if you look at America today, look at the rights of women being snatched in America today. They've taken away abortion rights in many, many states. The Supreme Court has even, in some states, even if the pregnancy was the result of rape, abortion is banned. This is progress. So So what I'm saying is every time you think you've got somewhere, someone comes and snatches it away. So we constantly have to be asserting our rights and our existence and refuse to be, but it's really hard. Like I said, 3 women a week in this country are murdered by men they knew, including grandmothers, including sisters, wives, girlfriends, partners.
The question here, who's got the microphone, and then there are 3 people at the back who want to ask questions, so can you take the mic to the back rows next?
Hi,
Yes.
my name's Angelina. I'm a mum and a stepmum to 3 girls in their 20s. Nowadays, males are taking spaces on all women shortlists and undermining female sporting achievements and wanting access to female spaces. To what extent do you think this is part of a backlash against women's relatively recently won rights?
Oh, you're getting me into a trans debate. I'm not going there. I'm just not stepping into the trans debate. The only thing I will say is, I think it's become very ugly, the debate on both sides. And my friends are included. And I think we should all step back and try and be more rational and kinder when we're talking about this issue. But I'm not going there. I have enough enemies already. I don't need more enemies, so I can't answer your question.
Can Tessa answer?
No, I can't.
Okay.
Thank you.
It's a good question, but I'm just very worried because it's the storms just set off so much, and I've already got a stormy life.
She wants you to answer that.
No, I'm going to let the audience come. There are about 4 people waiting behind you. So at the back there.
So I'm Professor Divyen Shah. I'm actually a clinician at the Royal London Hospital and work for Queen Mary University of London. I just really wanted to say, Miss Alibhai Brown, that I'm just so incredibly proud of you because I see you on television. You very much wear your heart on your sleeve, very open-hearted. You're always, advocating for the vulnerable. Occasionally you may get it wrong, but you're not afraid. My daughter, who's in her early 20s, you are absolutely the perfect role model. And I've read some of the most moving articles that you've written in newspapers as well. So I'm incredibly proud of you.
Oh, bless you. I didn't pay him. I promise you I didn't pay him to say that.
I got you the biscuits.
Oh, you did get me the biscuits. Thank you.
That's very well-deserved praise, Yasmin. The question just behind you, at the back. Thank you.
Hello there. Yes, just back onto that debate that was initiated a few moments ago about Asian people coming into a foreign land and having an image of the English which was contrary to their experience. I think one of the aspects of that which we're overlooking slightly is the class background of the colonial rulers. Colonialism, as we understand it, was not the English. It was a certain strata of the English. And it was that image that was constructed in coloniality. And perhaps one of the reasons why we've had subcontinental problems in the UK with migrant communities being unable to understand their location in the UK is there was a lack of education in the colonies as to what the colonies were. And, the sex issue that was highlighted by a few of the commentators is quite misleading because, even in England, it was often said that there was no such thing as sex before the 1960s. No sex, please, we're British, and all the rest of it. So I think if people come into England and experience a certain strata of society, they need to learn also that they're actually experiencing a strata of society and not the whole of society. And that is where racial prejudice comes from.
Yeah, well said.
A question behind you, just behind you. Vicky, you had your hand up.
No, it was answered. It was, sorry. Well, it was really, thank you very much, it was answered by, more or less, by Yasmin, who talked about going backwards in places like the US. I was going to ask whether we're actually in a worse position now. And I quite like the idea of continuing to fight back. But there is a limit to how much one can carry on fighting, if you see what I mean. When things are taken away, then you're going to fight back to get the rights you had 50 years ago. Well, when is that going to end? And can you give us some hope?
Yeah.
A question here down the front, and then several
that
behind.
young lady was that.
And then back here.
Hi, I was just saying to you, what a great pleasure it is to meet you in person, because over the years I've been reading your articles, and basically I don't want to repeat what the gentleman said. I simply echo his thoughts about how good it is to read your articles in the paper. But my question to you today is, and just to tell you a little bit about myself, for years and years I have worked with supporting families from the black and ethnic minority communities who have children with disabilities. And what my work actually uncovered for me was a little bit sad to see that the voice of black women is simply not heard in this country. And I don't know what walls we need to break, things are changing, but the experiences of our communities are still not heard. What is your view about that? And how do you think, we can change that with all the changes that are already, in play?
I think that's a really important question, because just as we find success, as Tessa said, in immense success as women, we're living in times where some women are suffering immeasurably, and they're not seen and they're not heard. And the same goes for Black Nation women, that we have splendid, super successful Black and Asian women everywhere, in law, in medicine, in parliament, in the Lords, and so on. But really, what difference do they make? Or should it be, is it even fair to ask them, what are you doing for the unheard voices? One of the most heartbreaking things for me is to see someone of my own background, African, Asian, kind of totally demonizing other migrants, many of whom are mothers with children. I don't understand that. But the price you pay for power, is you play the game. And the game is very unfair to many people in this country, as we've heard when Megnat talked so brilliantly earlier. And it seems to me that most people who are successful don't look behind, and they play the game. And some of us don't play the game. Okay, and I think that's fine. That's fine. You don't have to play, you don't have to be, I'm ashamed of my industry. Much of my industry is vile, cruel, nasty, and destructive. And I could get a lot of money if I agreed to be like that. I know I could get a really good job at the Daily Mail. They love my writing. They really love my writing. I have a typed letter that Paul Dacre sent to me once, typed on an old typewriter, saying how much he admires me. But you have to make decisions in life, and I can't live with myself if I play that game. And there are many of us who don't play that game. And I think in politics, particularly, Saida Warsi is one I would name as one who does care about other people, and she's been kicked out, more or less, to the edges of the Tory party. I don't know why she's in this stupid party anyway, but she is. But she fights them. So it's not necessary for you to become like them in order to be up there, although the pressure is immense on women once they've got to these positions. I recognize that.
I think we're beginning to run out of time, because I think we're meant to end at 25 past. But I want to bring in, there are 2 or 3 people here And maybe we can take two questions one after another. Who's the second person who had their hand up? Over here on the extreme left-hand side. Okay.
Thanks so much for your talk. Very fantastic to hear you in person. Two questions, actually, very small ones. I think it's interesting to hear and see from other audience and from you also, like a lot of pressure for helping other women is the onus is put on the women to break the glass ceiling, to create a path for other women behind them. And I've not seen this question being asked to a man at all. So I feel like a lot of onus for inequality which women faces is the solution puts on other women.
Yeah, you're right.
Which is very difficult because it doesn't make it a systemic problem. It makes a women problem that they have to solve for other women and for themselves. So your thoughts on that. The second question is this big narrative which has been going on from years and years and generations that society's pride is placed on the women, be it abortion right, be it like any other reproductive right. So, I grew up in India and now I've come to UK a few years ago. And I've seen that happening even here as well. So when I grew up in India, it was a very different narrative about Western culture, US and UK. But living here, I can say that. So what can, and I think a lot of young women are sort of like contributing, coming out with their stories. What can we do to shift this narrative that this is not women's problems and like especially with the reproductive rights, it's about controlling women by giving different reasons. This is not society's problem. Like you need to move on, be able to see like beyond that. So what can we do to change that narrative about shifting this narrative?
I think you're completely right on the first point. And I surrender to you because I think, yes, why put the pressure only on the women? It isn't fair. I personally feel, though, that as a woman of colour who has got to where I've got to with a great deal of struggle, and I still struggle. People don't even know, 5 years ago, after working for The Independent for 17 years, I got a text sacking me, and all the women were sacked by The Independent when it went online, except for two. One who was an apologist for Putin because our owner is a Russian, and the other was somebody called Janet Street Porter, who was quite a glam. All the rest of us, we got texts after 17, 18 years. And all the hopeless men, they were much worse than us, not as good as us, they were kept. And I had to start all over again. 5 years ago, I was in my late 60s. I thought it was over. And so the struggles continue. And why should it be the women who I totally surrender to that? With the other one, it's a very complicated question, isn't it? We still have judges and juries in this country who are, hearing rape cases, who say, she was wearing a short skirt, or why was she out there in that place on her own? Why was she drunk? And shifting this is why rape convictions are so low. In other societies, it's even worse. Like I said, a lawyer saying about that poor woman who was virtually raped to death. Why was she out? But I think people are... One of the women in the book who's wonderful is called Laura Bates. She's a young woman. And read her books because she's really brilliant on fighting this narrative. And I think it'll never end. And I hate the idea that I was raised on in Indian movies. What do they say? Wo izzat, wo family ki izzat aurat mein hoti hai. Oh, yeah? Aurat, which means that a family's honor lies with the females. Why? Why is it our job? We didn't ask for it. Why do men can be dishonorable, but we hold the candle of honor in our family? It's rubbish. But it carries on, doesn't it?
Final question over here.
I have a question.
Well, there are two. Let's just take two questions together. First of all, over from the left-hand side, and then in the middle. And then we'll have to wrap up, I'm afraid.
Sure, thank you. I'll make it a quick one. So, I am from a matriarchal family. Have seen my mom do things which normally other women doesn't. And I had no idea what she does extra from other people outside my family because I've seen my mom grow.
Can you just hold the mic near so I
Yeah.
can...
And then I've seen my rest of my family members who are women do such things. But then it was a complete shift for me when I had to meet somebody else. Like when I married, she was my wife, by the way. So when I married her, I would go to the north part of India and I would see people wearing gungat and they wouldn't sit with men. So I never had an understanding of what that was. And she had to explain to me that this is why. This is the difference that we have within two different parts of India in itself. Oh. And that was a really strange thing for me because then I put that on us and I thought of a lot of things my aunt told me. So when she would be alone at home, she used to ask me to come home and live with her. And I asked her jokingly that, are you afraid of ghosts? She just said one word, no, I'm afraid of men. I had no idea what that meant back then. And there are a lot of things they're afraid of. And even the example of Raksha Bandhan. Why does women need to be protected, first of all? What are they protecting them for? Right? I mean, it's a family thing that you protect each other from perils of life, not other people. So as long as you focus everything on the modesty of a woman, I don't even know what is modesty, because they term it with complacency as well to the traditions and whatnot, whatever the men has figured out that they need to be complacent with. So until that changes, I don't think anything, even our thinking process, even the young generation,
I'm going to have to ask you to wrap up now because there's one other person who wants to speak.
But if you wanted, there's a wonderful book written by an Arab woman writer whose name I've forgotten. The book is called Hijab and Hymen. Read it. It's all about modesty and the pressures of modesty. Yes. Mona El Zawadi.
Yeah.
Zawadi.
All right, last question or comment.
I'm originally from India, but there was a lot of Afghan women who have come in my area, and they were talking about how Western women, and not only Western, even Indian or whoever, the civil services look down upon them just for being at home. They said we are culturally conditioned in a different manner. We are the bosses of our house, and yet we do whatever we feel like. But women who work look down upon us. They said, this is how you should behave. So when I heard them, I thought they were the ladies who punched, who said, you know, like kind of, I'm sorry, I don't want to swear, but what is this kind of culture which tells us this is progress, this is success, only if I'm working, I'm successful, only if I make money, I'm successful, only if I do that. Those were the underlying questions they were constantly asking me. We are homemakers, we are happy with it. That is what they were saying. And what I thought was beautiful. It was a very all-embracing narrative on women, not just the narrative that we speak about as women.
Well,
what would you like to say to them?
Well, I think they're wrong, sorry, because I think they can only do this because they're dependent on men for money.
No, they're not.
How do they make their money?
They weave, they earn.
Oh, okay, then that's fine.
Yeah.
That's fine. Because I think the central thing I teach all my young students at university and everybody is, and my mother told me this, always have your own money, always have your own bank account.
Yeah,
okay?
They weave, they earn, they embroider, they
if
do
they
a lot of
have
stuff.
that,
yeah.
I agree with them, that's their choice, it's fine. But if they're dependent on men, then that's control of a kind. Maybe they don't mind, but a day will come when they want to do something and he says, no, you can't do it. Because that's the power relationship.
Yeah, but as of now, they're quite happy with what they're doing and they're earning. And they said, but why do only women educated and women in power define kind of...
If you go to Mumsnet,
yes,
it's a website, white women are having this debate too, saying, why can't I stay at home and look after my children? Why do feminists want me to go out? This is an ongoing debate, I think.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. You've been a terrific crowd.
I'm sorry, I know there are more people who want to...